Hello, everybody. Welcome to Drupal GovCon. I'm coming to you live today from Seattle, which is just about as far away in the US as you can get from Washington, DC, but normally I am on site in Bethesda. A little bit about me, I'm a manager on Acquia's professional services team, and I see a few familiar faces in the room. I also pretty actively blog on my site about Drupal and related technologies. So if you enjoy the content you see today, please connect with me somewhere because you know, I do try to put out material a couple times a week on topics like using an IDE or Composer or things like that. Today we're going to be really going very basic into IDEs. I think this is a really important topic in regards to both Drupal 8 and Drupal 9. As somebody who came to Drupal 8 some years ago without a formal software development background, IDEs were a very new piece of technology for me as I was learning Drupal 8. So I certainly am aware that there are other folks out there that are in a similar boat to what I was. So I want to try and make that as easy as possible for you. So let's do a quick overview. Going super simple, super high level, there are sort of three common ways I see folks writing code. Either directly in the terminal using something like Nano or VI-Vim, using a text editor, which is very common and what I did myself in the Drupal 6, Drupal 7 era. I'm a big fan of Sublime Text, or using a full-blown IDE or an integrated development environment. And an IDE is a lot more than just a text editor, right? It is a text editor, but it is more than that. And that's why we're here today, because one of the questions I hear all the time, we're gonna go back to that last slide here in just a sec, can't I just use Sublime? Like, I really like Sublime. And sure, I mean, you can use a text editor for Drupal 8, but there's a lot of very good reasons not to. We're gonna get into some of that during our time together today. I will warn you that not all IDEs are created equal. That's not to say that PHP Storm, which happens to be at the top of the list, is the best one out there. It's great, it's fine, I use it. I'm not an affiliate for JetBrains, I just use their software. But the point is, you wanna make sure you use an IDE that is somewhat designed or optimized for PHP development. The thing I particularly like about PHP Storm is not only is it optimized for PHP development, it's also got some Drupal plugins, which is pretty slick. But at the end of the day, PHP Storm, Visual Studio, NetBeans, Aptana, Eclipse with the PHP version, I mean, pick your poison. As long as it is a true IDE, honestly, you're probably going to be fine. We'll talk a little bit more about that, what that means today. The other thing, and you'll hear me say this a couple of times and see it on my slides, it's really important that as your team begins using IDEs, if you're not already using them, that you all gravitate towards a common IDE. There's a couple of reasons for that, which we'll go ahead and address here quickly. The first is for debugging. When you set up your debugger, Xdebug, or whatever you're using, there's an IDE Xdebug or IDE debugger integration that happens. And if everybody's using different IDEs, that integration gets a little harder to maintain. Second, in terms of coding standards, editor configuration, troubleshooting, any of those topics just become that much simpler if I know that every one of you is using the exact same setup that I am, or vice versa. You know that I'm using the exact same setup you are. And this is a pretty common recommendation for development teams, right? It should extend beyond IDEs, right? We should all be using the same virtual environment. We shouldn't have half the team using Drupal VM and half the team using Lando, right? Whichever one we use is great. They're both awesome choices, but we shouldn't split up. We should all be using the same thing. Very much the same with an IDE. If 4 out of 5 people on your team are using PHP Storm, ideally all 5 of you would also, all of you would be using the same thing. So back to that original question, can't I use a text editor? Why can't I just use Sublime Text? And again, Sublime's awesome. I have it installed on my computer right now and I do use it. But Sublime misses out on a few of the really critical things, and this is a change with from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8 and 9. Debugging didn't really used to be a thing in Drupal, right? I mean, we all did this. Some of you may still do this, where you're going to use the devel module, and you're just going to like DPM a variable or an array or something to try and figure out why it's not working. That doesn't work so hot in Drupal 8 and 9. And doing real debugging, where you can actually step through the code, that does require more powerful software than just a text editor. Object-oriented support. Again, in Drupal 7, code completion, autocomplete was a big thing. You know, when you're trying to do like hook form alter, yeah, a text editor, especially if you've installed a Drupal package, can autocomplete that function for you. But with an object-oriented setup, you're not just doing autocomplete. You need your text editor, your IDE, to sort of be constantly scanning and indexing all of the classes and methods that are in your code base. We're going to look at an example of what that looks like here shortly. And I'm not going to like try to mislead you. I have had people tell me, and I know from experience, like Sublime out of the box doesn't do Drupal autocomplete. You can download a package or a plugin for Sublime to make it do Drupal autocomplete. Like there are things you can do to a text editor to make it more IDE-like. You may even be able to bolt on so many additional things to Sublime Text to make it just like an IDE. Just remember, many of those plugins are community supported. And of course, we're in an open source community, so I'm not trying to steer you away from that. Just be aware you're using a piece of software to do a thing that it wasn't really designed to do. You're going to have a much better, much more smooth, much more stable experience doing this in an IDE. So we already talked about the first one with debugging, and we actually already talked about the second one as well. So let's do a quick example. So this is some code from the Drupal GovCon repository, and I made a very small change on line 56 here. In the real version of this code, we're not using deprecated code. We're actually calling entity type manager, for those of you who are familiar with the Drupal 8 entity system. Entity manager is not a thing anymore. It got deprecated in like Drupal 8.2 or something like that. But looking at this code in Sublime Text, you'd never know it, right? This looks like a perfectly fine function in Sublime. Looking at the same code in PHP Storm, however, we see something really important. We see this scratched out line here on the get storage method. And the reason for that is, again, entity manager is deprecated. And the IDE is going to tell me at a glance, because I have used a method that is deprecated, it's going to say, hey, Mike, hey, pay attention, look at me. And it's going to tell me just by looking at it that there's a problem. And again, in this case, the strikeout text is going to tell me that it's deprecated. So I just want to quickly do two takeaways here before we move on. So the first one is a text editor is the wrong job for writing custom PHP code in Drupal 8. But that's not to say you can't do it. You can. You're just going to make your life a lot harder. And a prime example is this, right? I know entity manager is deprecated. I know that. I could not begin to tell you everything that's been deprecated in Drupal 8.x, right? There's a ton of stuff that's been deprecated. And even though I work with this API every day, I don't know all of it. So if this was a different example and it was something that I didn't know by heart, that's gonna be a problem. The second thing I want to point out, just as I've been talking about here, I can look, as an architect, I can look at code and I can tell you if it was written in a properly configured IDE or not. And I don't say that to be vain. I say it because it's really obvious when it's not. I had somebody apply for a job some time back, and I opened the code in my IDE and I looked at it and I like, what the hell is this? And when I talked to the individual about it, they told me that they wrote it all in the terminal. Which, I mean, cool. Like if you're good enough at writing PHP code that you can do that in a terminal, that's awesome. But there are so many things that the IDE is either going to do for you in terms of formatting, help you with in terms of autocomplete, warn you about in terms of code quality, unused variables, unused use statements, deprecated code, etc. That it literally will light up like a Christmas tree when you look at it, code in an IDE that was not written in an IDE. And in fact, I helped a colleague recently who was having some major trouble getting code working that had not been written in an IDE. And again, it took me, I don't know, 2 minutes to fix the problem because the IDE told me what was wrong because of all the code scanning that it was doing down into the Drupal API. So we're going to take some time now and do an in-depth look at PHP Storm. And before we start, I just have a bit of trivia for you that is completely unrelated to anything with IDEs. Does anybody know what and where the deepest lake in the world is? You can answer in chat if you happen to know. I didn't, I had to look this up. This surprised me. Any takers? It is not Lake Michigan. It is somewhere in Siberia. Nice job, E. Collins. It's like Lake Baikal in Siberia, and it is something like 5,400 feet deep, which is ridiculous. Lake Superior is like a quarter of that, for those of you rooting for a lake in the US. The reason I bring this up, which is completely unrelated to an IDE, is that an IDE is an incredibly complex, crazy piece of software. And I will be the first to admit that there are probably people on this call that know more about IDEs than I do. And much with a very deep body of water, at a certain point, it doesn't matter how deep it is. It doesn't matter how complex an IDE is. They can be very, very intimidating. But if you can figure out what you need to do in that IDE, much like if you can figure out how to swim in a lake, it doesn't really matter if that lake is 10 feet deep or 5,000 feet deep. Water's water, right? And an IDE in this case is an IDE, or it is a piece of software that can help you do code editing. So as we're looking at this, it's really easy to get overwhelmed by all the things that the IDE can do. And I'm just going to tell you, learn it piece by piece, focus on what you need to do, and only go as deep as you need to go, and you're going to be just fine. So here are some topics that we're going to look at as we jump into this demo of PHP Storm. And again, most of what I'm going to be showing you would apply to any IDE. It's going to be a little different perhaps in Eclipse than it would be in PHP Storm, but all of these things are a thing. So with that, let me switch over and we'll get started. Now I will switch into the presentation mode when we actually get down into some specific code. What we're looking at here is actually the Drupal GovCon code repository. I know it says 2017, but that's okay. We just haven't renamed the repo. For those of you who don't read my content or haven't seen me speak before, we put a lot of effort into keeping this repository open source. It's publicly available on GitHub. That way, when we talk about it in conferences or whatever, you're welcome to download the code and try it out yourself. So there's nothing proprietary about what I'm showing you here. You could actually go clone this code today and do everything we're about to do. So please do check it out. First thing I want to draw your attention to over here on the left is our project Explorer, and you can toggle that to get it out of the way should you choose. One of my favorite things about PHP Storm, and this is a silly thing, but it is a cool thing, is that it does color code anything that is get ignored on the left side. So a little bit about the GovCon project. We use Composer to manage our dependencies. This is a BLT project, which is Acquia's build and launch tools. So there are some things about how this project is structured because it's a Composer project. And because it's sort of a standard BLT project. So knowing as I'm sort of clicking through, looking at what's here at any given level, what's actually going into Git versus what's only being managed locally is super helpful for me. And as you look at your own projects, you know, sometimes doc root goes in a folder called web. Like there's a lot of different ways projects can be organized. I don't want you to get too caught up on the particulars there. So let's go ahead and quickly open up a PHP file or a .module file that uses PHP and have a look at a few things. I will actually go into presentation mode now so you can actually see the code here just a little bit better. So a few things I just want to point out. The first one is that in the IDE, you get some really slick features like finding uses or going to the declaration of a given thing. So let's say, for instance, that you're trying to write in this particular custom module an implementation of Drupal core URL, which, you know, if we come down here, you can see it being used in this capital camp glue user register form submit function. And let's say you're having trouble getting this URL implementation to work. Like, you know, is it supposed to be a route? Is it supposed to be from URI? Like, what is it supposed to be? Well, you can very quickly and easily do a find usages of a particular class in the IDE. It's telling me there's a ton, that's fine. You know, it's already found, you know, almost 1,000 uses, but it will help you very quickly locate uses of this particular class. If I think that from URI is actually what I want, I can immediately jump to the declaration. So we are now in a different file. And of course, I don't remember the hotkey off the top of my head for presentation mode to show you. So one second, let's jump back out of presentation mode. So we have left the .module file and we are now in a class in, where are we? Somewhere down in Drupal core, docroot core lib Drupal core URI.php. Anyway, so we've got that from URI function method that we were talking about a moment ago. And now I can see sort of how it is actually defined and read a little bit about the documentation. There's actually quite a bit of documentation here that you know, tells me how to use it and what to do with it. So the first thing I sort of want to just clarify and call out here with the IDE is it's really good for taking something and either finding a use for it or finding the declaration of it. So that's nifty. The next thing that it's great at is telling you at a glance if things are being used or not. So looking at our help function, looking at this form alter function, I can tell without even reading a line of code in this function that the variables that are getting passed into this function, in this case, the route match, and in this case, the form state, in this case, form state and form ID, these functions are not actually doing anything to override or change these variables as they come into the functions. That's not necessarily good or bad. It's really useful to see that at a glance. It'll also tell me things like, you know, I can do something silly like echo hello world. Again, because the PHP code is being analyzed, PHP Storm's going to tell me that line 34 is unreachable because it knows it comes after the return. So it's going to tell me, hey, dummy, you're writing code that is never going to run. Other simple little examples, you know, I could do a, you know, array equals array, thinking that I need an array for something and I'm going to use it in my code. And then I get all the way to the end and I'm done and I glance back up and I realize, oh shoot, I defined this array variable and I didn't actually use it. So I can safely get rid of this without damaging anything. So again, this is somewhat I was talking about in terms of code quality and really trusting in the tool to tell you that as you read through code, it's going to give you some real major hints as to best practices and whether or not you're using things that are there. And in fact, if you're using the Drupal Coder project with PHP Code Sniffer to actually do code quality scanning, this particular example that I just gave is actually something that would cause PHP Code Sniffer to throw a warning or an error because you've got an unused variable. So again, the IDE in this case is actually doing you a really big favor, and it's catching that before your code quality stuff hits. Another little visual thing I want to point out, if you see this green box on line 27, again, this is a visual thing to help me see that this is a Git controlled file. We're part of a Git repository. So I've now made a change that is being tracked in Git. Again, little visual thing, but really spiffy as you're sort of reviewing, you know, if you're doing code review, if you're doing any sort of rebasing or anything like that, being able to go into a file and just really rapidly see what's changed without having to go through and do a full Git diff is super slick. I'm trying to think if there's anything else in here that is worth showing. I don't think in this file there is. Let's jump back over to a couple other files. And yes, as Tim was saying, if you guys do have questions while we're going, I'm keeping an eye on chat. Please do let me know and I will try to answer them as we go. So I do want to point out the file that we were just looking at is a .module file, which even though this is obviously a little different than Drupal 7, mostly because we're more strongly typing our variables like array and form state interface and so on and so forth. Like this is not that alien from Drupal 7, right? This is pretty standard. Now on the other hand, let's go look at an object-oriented PHP file. So this is actually a views access plugin that we wrote for the conference this year. And you can see there's actually quite a bit more going on that looks a little different, you know, a little bit more like actual PHP development and a little less like Drupal 7 hook implementations. So there's a few things I do want to just point out here as we dig into this file. So similarly, now we're actually digging into session access, which is our custom class, which extends the access plugin base, just like we talked about earlier. If you're trying to figure out, well, who else is using this plugin base? You know, is there a better example of what I'm trying to build? Again, the IDE is gonna help you out with that. Where is the line I wanted to show you guys? Well, I'm sure we'll find something somewhere. Autocomplete, super helpful here. So we've got this account interface variable, which you can see that I'm using in the code. It's actually an account interface object getting passed into this determine access function. Again, because of the way PHP Storm is scanning, because this is hard typed. So by typing account interface onto account and by having the proper use statements in place here and the parameters in the function commentary, when I come in and actually start doing autocomplete on account, it's actually going to show me all of the methods on the account interface variable account. Again, it'll warn me if I try to use get username, it's going to tell me sort of here on the fly that this is deprecated. I can jump down into the function and it's going to say deprecated in Drupal 8.800. It's removed in Drupal 9, and then it's going to tell me what to use. So get account name instead. So I should, yep, there it is. I should be able to just swap out in this case, get username and make it get account name just again, right on the fly. Again, that's a great example of one that I didn't know right off the top of my head. But as I'm writing my code, the IDE is gonna tell me and help me on the fly. In terms of actually writing the PHP code, like I'll be honest with you, like this is not, I would say, significantly better quality code than I would write in PHP Storm. You know, or not in PHP Storm, I'm sorry, in Sublime. I like to think that my code quality is middling anywhere that I write it. The thing that makes it better in the IDE is the IDE is going to warn me when I'm making a mistake so that I can fix the mistakes on the fly. Again, whereas in a text editor, it's not going to do that. Now, I see a question into the text in the chat. What IDE would you recommend when working on Ubuntu? That's a great question. I work in Ubuntu with VMs. I don't tend to, I run a Mac as my host machine. I'm not sure if you can run PHP Storm on Ubuntu or not. So I would not be the best person to answer that question, I'm sorry. But the list I gave you before, PHP Storm, Visual Studio, Eclipse, Aptana, any of those would certainly be an option. Give me just a moment, because there is something I want to show you. I just need to go find it. It's in a different file. I think I know where it is, though. It's not in that one. This one. Yes, it's in this one. So the other thing you can do in the editor is you can do a comment or an annotation right here, sort of in line as you're defining a variable. So in this case, I'm sort of telling PHP Storm on the fly that web form is an instance of this Drupal entity web form submission. So just as a quick example, I'm going to move this code up, and now I'm going to do web form. And in this case, it does autocomplete. So, that's maybe redundant, maybe not. But I will definitely say there are times when if you don't do that, you do not get the full autocomplete here. So just, again, little tip, if you are defining a variable someplace like this that is actually an instance of a class or an instantiation of a class, it's worth grabbing. Another question from chat: how much benefit that we're discussing today also translates to non-Drupal work for those of us more often in Twig, CSS, et cetera? You absolutely can set up your IDE, using like ESLint or CSSLint, coding standards. Most of what I'm showing you here is sort of really drilling down and focusing in on the PHP aspect of it. But I mean, you can absolutely configure for JavaScript, Sass, non-PHP development as well. Now, I would say that if you're working on a team that primarily does application development and you're using like Java or C or some other language, the IDEs I've recommended today are sort of optimized or better for PHP. So, again, you're going to want to look at what your team primarily does or what languages you primarily use. That way you're optimizing your tooling for the languages that you use. But, I think you're going to get pretty good results there. We're going to talk about debugging in a moment. I have not done a bunch of PHP Storm debugging with Twig. I believe it is possible to do. I have not done a ton of it personally, no. Okay, so last couple of things I just want to quickly show. PHP Storm does have a terminal built into it. So if you want to, if you so desire, you can actually use all of your terminal commands right inside. Personally, I like having my actual Mac terminal separate. That way I can keep it in a different window. That's a personal preference. I know many people who do use the terminal right there in PHP Storm, and they have no trouble. Similarly, there is Git. I use the Git history all the time when I'm going in and looking at something. Understanding like in a particular file, like what is going on with this? Why is it this way? I can go in and see, oh wow, that Mike Madison guy, he did something weird to this, like what happened? I can go back and track that Git history right there in PHP Storm, which is really nice. Couple other things, if you're a fan of using the to-do annotation, PHP Storm will help you find every to-do in your code, which is I think pretty slick. There's a few other useful things that you can do there. The search is pretty solid. You can do in-file search, which is not exciting, and then you can do in-project search. So on my keyboard to get that up, I hit Apple F since I'm, or Command F since I'm on a Mac. I believe it would be Control F on a PC. You can also go up to Edit Find. You can also do Command Shift F, which will bring up this dialog, where you can start digging in and saying like, you know, we want to go find every usage of URI from whatever. And obviously in the config directory, there's nothing, but you know, I could go do a search and more specifically limit what I'm looking for based on that. Again, this is something you can do in a text editor, but I'm pretty pleased with it. Lots of feedback as you're going through. Anytime something underlines, squiggles, there's almost always some helpful text that it's going to give you. But you know, if I were you and you're thinking about prioritizing the IDE, the couple of things that I would really focus on are getting used to writing code in the panel. You know, obviously I'm in dark mode. You know, I've tweaked the settings there a little bit. You know, this project is set up for use with PHP Storm, so there is a .idea. I don't know why it's .idea, but it is .idea. Let me just show you that. So like in my Mac Finder here, you can see this little hidden folder. By working with PHP Storm, it is creating that hidden folder. So we've got that get ignored so that it doesn't inadvertently crop up. You know, just little things like that to set up your project and set up your environment to sort of optimize. You know, again, making sure that you're comfortable with the editor and just sort of navigating through it. You know, if this disappears, oh crap, how do I get that back? Understanding how to jump down and find something, understanding what your IDE is going to do when you make a mistake. You know, again, in PHP Storm, you can actually see over here on the left that now my entire project is red squiggled. And I can follow that red squiggle down all the way to where I made my mistake, and it'll actually show me exactly where and what. You can see there's a little red bar over here, which is pretty slick. And I realize so much of what I'm talking about here is sort of user interface, just sort of visual cues, but you know, kind of coming all the way back to the original premise here, so much of what the IDE is going to do for you is draw a giant circle around problems visually so that you know as you're working what's going on. And a lot of the sort of ins and outs of working with the tool are things you're going to sort of learn as you proceed. Quick question from Max. Are there ways to incorporate or connect to files on remote Linux VMs that I only have SSH CLI access to with a local IDE program? I think there is a way to do that, yes. I've not used my IDE to do it, but I am, so I don't know off the top of my head how to do that, but I'm pretty sure that is a thing that you can do, yes. Whether or not you can do that with PHP Storm, I'm not sure, but I think that is something you can do. So let me move forward a bit and then I will answer your question, Tim. So recommendations, general recommendations, again, standardize as a team, share as much configuration as possible for debugging and your editor config. There is actually a dot file in Git that you can use, a dot editor config, which is recommended, which will help make sure that your line endings, your spacing, character, the number of spaces, etc., are all consistent, again, so that you don't have a ton of funky Git changes. And you really should classify that IDE as part of your development environment, just like you would your virtual machine and any other build tools. There are a number of things I use other than the IDE. Believe it or not, I do use a GUI for Get. Now, most of my Get work is done on the command line, but there are still times when I'm looking at what somebody else has done, or particularly on large teams when I've got like 10 or 15 upstreams that I'm managing and I need to constantly be pulling and keeping track of who's where. Having something more than just the command line is very useful. I do use Sublime Text, as I said. I don't use it to do Drupal development anymore, but if I do need to do simple text editing or make a change to a document or something like that, a text file or a markdown file, I use Sublime all the time. As I said, I use the Mac terminal more than I use the PHP Storm terminal. Of course, I use local development VMs, so that tends to be either Lando DDEV or Doxel in a Docker desktop scenario, or Drupal VM in a Vagrant scenario, and of course, Homebrew, SSH keys, etc. I actually have a blog post about setting up a host MacBook for Drupal and local PHP development, which I can point you to if you feel like you need it. I guess the point is the IDE is an important part of a balanced development environment. Last thing I want to talk quickly about in our last 10 minutes or so is debugging. So the big difference between a debugger and what you would typically do in Drupal 7 or 6 using Devel is that in the Drupal 7 paradigm, there was not a lot going on that you didn't see. And what I mean by that is sort of monkey see, monkey do. What's there is what's happening. And in Drupal 8, that's just unfortunately not the case. So what I mean by that is if I'm looking back in my .module file and I'm looking at like this form alter function, you can see form state, but those are not the only two variables sort of floating around. There's a lot happening. So if I do function capital camp glue form alter, you can see the autocomplete there. A little bit of formatting cleanup that I need because I don't need the fully namespaced form state interface because I already have it as a use statement up above. I do print hello, nothing fancy, and do a breakpoint here. Let me just quickly flush my cache. I actually have this set up to do debugging with command line as well. So I ran my command here in my terminal off window, and it caught my Drush debugger. And all of this is possible while this is running in the background because of Xdebug. So in this case, I'm running a Lando VM. The Drupal image for the Lando VM is sort of pre-configured to work with Xdebug. Acquia's version of that, which is available, has Xdebug sort of pre-configured to do PHP Storm debugging, because that's what most of us use. So a lot of that stuff is just ready to go. And yes, Tim, I do toggle it on and off. And in fact, the Drupal GovCon Lando file, I'll just show you real quick, has a Xdebug on and an Xdebug off quick command that I can just go Lando Xdebug off and it kills it so that I don't have to worry about it for performance. Yeah, it's really slick. So now that I've got something with a debug statement and I've got my debugger on, one moment here, just go visit my site. I just started the debugger and I've got a little applet here that I can hit once the page decides to load. And we'll do a little bit of actual debugging quickly just to show you what that looks like, assuming my VM wants to run with Zoom going. Backing up while we wait on this to load, I know Tim asked, how much of anything did you have to do to configure PHP Storm to know Drupal? Not a lot out of the box. It's going to detect actually if it's a Drupal project or not and ask you what version of Drupal, and there's some of that stuff. The biggest thing that I've done to sort of configure this is to get like the editor config, the PHP code sniffer file, some of that stuff up here at the top level. so that it is in fact doing some of those code quality and things like that. But in terms of it knowing Drupal itself, yeah, it's not really a huge thing. Okay, so let's now go to a basic page with my debugger running, and you can see I didn't click, it automatically jumped. You can see my page is now just sitting here spinning, and that poor page will now spin forever to get this running here. So as I said a moment ago, here are my 3 items that cropped up in the form alter that we're working with: form array, form ID, which is a string in this case, and form state, which is an instance of the Drupal core form state object. But then there's all this other stuff too. The session, the globals, so on and so forth. So there's quite a bit more here to actually drill down into than there used to be. And I will tell you right now, the data model in Drupal 8, because of the way Symfony handles routing and all of this stuff, is much different than it was in Drupal 7. It is much harder to sort of guess properly. So even if what you need is somewhere in form, good luck finding what you're looking for, just sort of blindly grabbing it. You do typically need to drill down. So from here, I've got a couple of options. I can step down into a thing if I needed to. For instance, if I was debugging this particular form submit function, and if I wanted to step down into the URL from URI method and see what's happening there, I could. If I wanted to jump over something or bounce back out, I can, and that's kind of where all of these different items are, basically to just let me navigate. If you so desire, you could go into the Drupal doc root into index.php and stick a breakpoint on one of these, kernel requests or high-level requests that basically make Drupal work. You could literally step through every single process that Drupal runs on your application. I don't know why you'd want to. That would take a while, but you could. But the bottom line is, with the debugger, if you're having problems, if for some reason something's fatal erroring and it's telling you we're fatal erroring on line 58, you can go put a breakpoint in on like line 55 and you can step through bit by bit by bit. And this application is not going to fatal error until we sort of step down and get to that point. So using a debugger, I would say, is one of the more challenging aspects of working in an IDE. But it's also one of the most rewarding, because when you're doing more complex PHP development, frequently you do need to actually see, hey, I need to change something in that form. What the heck is in that form? Well, the debugger is going to be the quickest and easiest way for you to actually go see in this instance what's in there. If you are getting a fatal error, the debugger is going to be what's useful for you to go in and see what's in there. And when you're finally done, you hit play and your movie resumes. And eventually this will go ahead and load on its own in the background back to the basic page. And you can see my little print hello cropping up there. So we just did that. Question from Dorian: what extension did I install on Chrome? This isn't actually an extension. I don't remember, somewhere on the PHP Storm applet bookmarks, there's like there's a page that JetBrains actually gives you that you can generate a start and stop debugger bookmark. So that's all that is. It's not even an actual plugin. It's just a bookmarklet that they generate to start and stop a debugger, so that you don't have to happen to have had the right browser page up. Last thing I want to do before we move on to Q&A, Acquia has started very recently offering what we're calling our cloud IDEs. And I know just from speaking at GovCon in the past, a challenge for many government organizations is local development, because many government entities are not willing or able to give their employees sudo and root level access to install and spin up and spin down VMs. So if you happen to be hosting with Acquia, talk to your Acquia folk. because we do actually now have a cloud virtual environment that you can use so that you don't need all of that access locally. And it has an IDE running in the cloud as well. And my colleague, Alejandro, did a really great write-up on that on the Acquia.com blog. So we're not gonna go into this. This isn't a protracted pitch for this, but if you're interested, go check that out. I also want to just give a quick pitch. I'm talking about accessibility testing with Pally tomorrow. Same time at 3:30 Eastern. So if you enjoyed this session and you want to join me again, please check this one out. Stay in touch. I will try to answer some questions in the chat afterwards if we don't get to all of them here on Zoom. But again, follow me on Twitter, hit me up on LinkedIn, check out my blog, and here's my email. You're welcome to drop me any questions that you have after. So let's get into the questions. So why can't we use Devel and Kint versus the IDE debugger? So the big reason for that, Wombat, is that if you're doing a Kint on that form object, it is huge. So first and foremost, if you do something with Devel, it's only going to print out precisely what you put into it, whereas the debugger is going to show you everything that's going on. Second, Devel is going to print out a particular variable or object. It's not going to give you any context to what happens before or after, so you can't really step through the application using Devel. And third, again, the performance impact to your browser of trying to spit out some of these things, like I can't tell you how many times I've crashed my browser trying to Kint in Twig. So can you use Devel and Kint? Yes, you can. Just be aware that it's going to give you a very, very limited view of the world, and it may not be helpful, and it certainly won't be as helpful as using a debugger. Mark, do I use Dev Desktop? No, personally I don't. I use either Lando or DDev or Drupal VM on everything. Many of my customers use Dev Desktop, but I have wildly different VM configs between my different projects and environments. So I tend to use a more configurable VM, again, Lando, Drupal VM, DDev. What other questions do we have for the next couple minutes while we're all together here?
Actually, we are just about out of time, I believe.
Okay.
We'll be having the next presenter coming in. I don't see him yet, so we can keep going just a little bit. If anyone wants to jump in with their voice, feel free to unmute or type your question. I didn't see any on Slack, so just here.
Okay. Well, the last thing I'll tell you, if you haven't worked with an IDE before, PHP Storm is not free. It's a couple $100 a license. Many of the other ones that are on my list, especially Eclipse and Aptana, are free. If you can get your employer to pay for PHP Storm, then that's where I would start. But if you're paying for this out of your own pocket, I would definitely start dinking around with a free one. Just keep in mind that each one of these applications has their own nuance and they're all a little different. So if you spend 2 months getting used to working in Eclipse and then you buy PHP Storm, there's probably going to be a little bit of a relearning curve to do that. I've worked in PHP Storm for like 4.5 years now. So, diving into something else would likely take me a little bit of effort. But at the end of the day, download one. It's going to help you get ready for Drupal 8 and Drupal 9 if you're not there yet. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I will be on Slack for the next little bit in the coding and development room if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, as I said, hit me up on Twitter or someplace else on the internet, and we'll chat there. Thanks, everybody.